Hi there, and welcome to MS202 Lesson 19 on Defensive Operations at the Squad and Platoon level. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS at the University of Montana, and I'm going to be leading you through this lesson. So to start off, I want you to think about something here. When it comes to a team sport, let's say like basketball, what do you envision with the word defense? What advantages favor the defense and what advantages favor the offense? Let's think about that for just a moment. Okay, now that you've thought through a few of those things, I want you to keep those in mind as we work through this lesson together. This can be a pretty intense lesson. There is a lot of information involved. We'll go step by step here, but I promise I'll try to get all of your questions answered as we go through, okay? To start off, we're actually going to watch a video together here. And during this video, I want you to make note, whether mental or actually write them down, of the strengths and weaknesses that you see in both the offense and the defense. Now, it is a pretty popular movie. You've likely seen it before. If you haven't, it is legitimately one of my top 5 movies of all time. So take some time in your busy schedule to watch it if you haven't seen it before, or even go back and review it if you have seen it. But watch this and again, make note of those strengths and weaknesses of both the offense and the defense.
This is where we hold them. This is where we fight. This is where they die. And these shield boys. Remember this day, man, for it will be yours for all time.
Spartans, lay down your weapons!
Persian! Come and get them! Hold! Give them nothing, but take from them everything! Stay! That's the best you can do!
Now, if you couldn't tell, that is from the movie 300. It's a scene called Defending the Hot Gate. And I hope you were able to figure out who was on offense and who was on defense there as we discuss the next little bit. So, some questions for you. What did you think of the video from just say a tactical standpoint? Especially if you're thinking offense versus defense. Now, could you tell what the primary mission was of the defensive operation? And if you guessed that it was simply to defeat and destroy that enemy force, then you're right on. Now think about these here. Why are all of the Spartans dependent upon each other when defending their positions? And why was this critical to their success? And the next thing to think about, what was the purpose of those multiple layers of defense? Could you tell how the Spartans were set up? Have you maybe seen that before or heard of that technique or tactical use in movies like this or even real life operations? What's that purpose of those multiple layers? Well, the technical answer is what they used it for, to defend in what we call depth. Defend in depth. And it forced the enemy attack over and over and over again rather than a one and done. Does that make sense? Now, another thing to think about is how you would apply the principles from this video to today. Does it apply to today's world? Does it apply to how we actually conduct our defensive operations today? Could it? In what world can you imagine that we would be using those same principles? So I can tell you that we do. It just looks a little bit different than spears and shields now. All right, so moving right into our learning objectives today, I'm going to help you identify the purposes of the defense, explain the different characteristics and types of defenses, and then we're going to finish up by describing the 5 kinds of battle positions. So to start off with, what is the main purpose of a defensive operation? Well, it's to create conditions favorable for your offense, which allows the military and the army to regain the initiative in an operation. Now, why does the army generally conduct the defense? Again, to create those conditions that are favorable for the offense. There's a reason this is said twice and in this manner, is because we really want you to hone in on those terms. Create conditions favorable for the offense. That's critical. Now, what strengths are in conducting defensive operations, you might ask? Well, the strengths are the defender's ability to occupy positions before an attack and using that available time to improve their defenses. And when does the defending force stop improving its defense? Hopefully you already know the answer to this one. Only in the options of retrograding or when it begins to engage enemy forces. Other than that, you should always be doing everything you can to improve your defense. You're never just set and ready to go. There's always more improvements that you can make. So remember that if you're ever on a defense lane of some sort. Now let's talk characteristics of defensive operations. We are going to go piece by piece through these, but there are 7 that I want you to focus on. Those are disruption, flexibility, maneuver, mass and concentration, operations in depth, preparation, and security. Now, when we talk disruption, we're talking about employing actions that desynchronize an enemy force's preparations. It's really very self-explanatory on disrupting the enemy. Does that make sense? And then when we talk flexibility, that's actually required to anticipate enemy actions and then allocate our resources accordingly. So we're going to make sure that we're flexible in how we move our resources and our positions and our different options around in a way that we're anticipating our enemy's actions. And then when we talk maneuver, there's 2 pieces to this. One, it allows the defense to take full advantage of the AO, or area of operations, and to mass and concentrate when and where is desirable. And then it also allows the defense to achieve a position of advantage. So maneuver is a big characteristic to think about when you're thinking about your defensive operation. Now, when it comes to disruption, how does that actually enable a defense to defeat a larger enemy force? Well, it helps by defeating smaller elements of that enemy. So when we're disrupting them or we're disrupting their operation, we're going for those little elements that help to defeat the big elements. So if you think about it as an analogy of winning the battles to win the war, you want to win those little things in order to really end up winning the big thing. Now when we talk flexibility, what potential advantages does flexibility create? Well, it's a proactive approach that mitigates any surprises that the enemy may enact. So when we're thinking through and we're thinking about what we expect to happen, maintaining that flexibility in our defense really is what we consider proactive, and it helps mitigate any of those surprises that we might end up seeing. Let's talk about a couple more. Another big one is called mass and concentration. This is where we mask the effects of overwhelming combat power, firepower, and we're doing it to support the decisive operation. Now, commanders retain and reconstitute a certain reserve and maneuver in order to gain superiority. Now, during this, you may surrender some ground in order to gain time, in order to concentrate those forces' effects. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Now, operations in depth, this tends to be a little confusing for some people, and I can understand there's a lot of different pieces to this. This is when we have the simultaneous application of our combat power throughout our entire AO to improve our chances for success. So it's really multiple moving pieces is one way to think about it. They're quick, violent, and simultaneous actions that can hurt, confuse, or even paralyze your enemy force. You do it to prevent the enemy from gaining momentum, and there's synchronized, decisive, shaping, and sustaining operations that facilitate your mission success. So when we think operations in depth, really just think of a lot of moving pieces that are being used to overwhelm an enemy. Now, what do commanders how do commanders determine where to mass and concentrate their firepower? Well, here's a hint. It's my favorite answer. There's a little bit of sarcasm in that. My favorite answer, MET-TCI. So we use that little MET-TC, that way to analyze a mission, right? We use that to decide where and when and how we're going to concentrate our firepower. Now for our last two, preparation and security. Preparation is another big one. We have to arrive in our AO before the attacker and use our available time to prepare. So when you're preparing to defend, you have to get there and start immediately preparing your defense. You need to study the ground, select your positions that allow for your massing of fires on likely avenues of approach, on ways that enemy is going to get into your area. You can combine natural and even man-made obstacles to canalize. So when we think of canalize, funneling forces into specific engagement areas. We coordinate and rehearse actions on the ground. We want to gain familiarity with our terrain, and we place security, intel, and even recon forces throughout our AO. So that's how we prepare. Preparation is probably one of the biggest pieces of a defensive operation because you truly have to do a lot of work to make sure that your defense is secure and ready to go. And then speaking of security, this is where we are going to perform security, protection, information operations, even cyberspace, electronic warfare tasks. Those are all part of your security. And security operations prevent enemy intel, their surveillance, and their recon assets from determining your locations and your strengths and weaknesses. So having proper security is all encompassing when it comes to your defensive operation. So now, again, when it comes to preparation, how do obstacles and/or the lack of them affect your preparation? Well, existing obstacles can create opportunity, but the lack of obstacles creates a need to construct them, which can be time-consuming. So that's just something to think about when you're talking about your obstacles. Use existing ones that are in the AO if you can. Otherwise, make sure that you're prepared to take that time to construct your own. And then security. Is security an initial concern or is it continuous? And why? Hopefully this is another one of those common sense answers for you. It's always critical and it must always be continuous in order to ensure that the opportunity for the enemy to surprise us is completely mitigated. So as you know, with any kind of an operation, security, that's an incredibly important piece of anything that we're doing. But just like with this, it's something that's continuous without defensive operations as well. Now let's talk our different types of defensive operations. We're going to talk area, mobile, and retrograde. And what I really do want to focus on here is area defense. Mobile defenses and retrograde, yes, those are defensive operations, but not likely something that you're going to see in ROTC on a big scale, just because they truly are bigger scale operations. So an area defense focuses on the terrain, whereas a mobile defense is focusing on your enemy movement. Retrograde, on the opposite hand, is focusing on your friendly movement. So just remember which types of focuses each different defensive operation actually has. So a little bit more in depth on the area defense. This is concentrating on denying your enemy forces access to your AO. It's making sure that they do not get access to you for a specific time. It's not actually going on the offense and destroying them outright. It's focusing on retaining the terrain that you have or that you want, but retaining that terrain. And units maintain their positions and control what we call the in-between terrain. So really they need you, as the unit that's defending, needs to control the terrain between the enemy force and the area that they want. So it's not just defending this specific area, it's also the in-between terrain. Now we want to focus our fires into the engagement area. So how you would set up your defense, just like we talked before, it's really focusing on those likely avenues of approach. And then commanders use their reserve to reinforce, add depth, block, or even restore by counterattack. They also seize the initiative and they destroy the enemy. That's what we all-encompassing consider an area defense. Now we're going to move into mobile defense, but I want to know if you know the difference between what a striking force is and a fixing force. Have you heard those terms before? If not, that's okay. Striking is dedicated to the counterattack, whereas fixing is designated to supplement that force by fixing the enemy in place. So they are two separate missions, two separate roles within a defense, but striking, just consider in your mind that they strike, they're going in for that counterattack, whereas fixing forces are truly meant to just keep that enemy in one spot in order to supplement and help the striking force do their job. So with that, mobile defense, again, you likely won't see this as much in ROTC. Maybe your program does practice this, but it is a larger scale environment, larger scale operation. But it concentrates on actually the destruction or defeat through a decisive attack by that striking force that we just talked about. They're focused on defeating or even destroying the enemy by allowing them to advance to an exposed point and then counterattacked by the striking force. So kind of a bait and switch, if you will. The striking force, when they go out, they do have the bulk of the combat power, whereas the fixing force is designated to supplement them by keeping that enemy from moving for a specific amount of time. Now we'll talk lightly about retrograde. This involves a very organized movement away from the enemy. It might be forced by the enemy, or a commander might even perform it voluntarily, but it does have to be approved by a higher echelon before being conducted. It's always part of a larger scheme of maneuver designed to regain the initiative and defeat the enemy. So this isn't actually just like a boarding mission or withdrawing or retreating away. A retrograde defense does serve a purpose. It's a little more risky, and it does involve movement away as if you are retreating, with the focus of regaining the initiative and defeating the enemy in a separate way. Okay, so now let's talk retrograde variations. There are 3 variations. We call them delay, withdraw, or retirement. Now, a delay is going to be when the force under pressure trades space for time by slowing down the enemy's momentum, inflicting maximum damage. So really think about it as units yield ground to gain time. Now, withdraw is going to be a little bit different. That's completely disengaging from the enemy, moving in a direction away from them. Units will voluntarily disengage to preserve the withdrawing force or release it for a whole new mission. And then a retirement, this is just a force that's already out of contact, moves away from the enemy. So you're done with that mission, you're out of contact, you're moving out now. Now we're going to move into battle positions. So again, I want you to think about this. What factors do you think are critical when establishing a defensive position? Well, let's talk about these. So we have 5 different battle positions, right? We have primary, alternate, supplementary, subsequent, and a strong point. Now, primary covers the enemy's most likely avenue of approach into the AO, or area of operations, whereas the alternate is assigned to a unit or a weapon for occupation when the primary is unsuitable. Supplementaries are located within the AO, and they provide the best sectors of fire and defensive terrain along a non-primary or even unexpected avenue of approach. Subsequent, that's when you're expected to move during the course of battle, so you'll have subsequent battle positions that you'll move to. This, if you're staying in one spot for your defense, likely not necessary, but you still would consider subsequent if you were going to be moving. And then you have your strong point. This is a very heavily fortified, typically tied to natural or some sort of reinforcing obstacle to create an anchor for the defense. Or it's used to deny the enemy decisive or key terrain. So those are your 5 battle positions. You've got primary, that's your main thing, going for those likely avenues of approach. You've got an alternate, just in case your primary is no longer suitable. You've got your supplementary, which is focusing on those maybe not as likely avenues of approach or unexpected ones. You got subsequent battle positions that are moving on as you're moving through a battle. And then you've got that strong point. That's where it's really tough, heavily fortified, definitely denying the enemy any type of access to decisive or key terrain, or it's being used as that anchor for your defense. That's it. I know that was a lot of information, but we did identify those purposes of the defense. We explained the different characteristics and our types of defenses, especially focusing on that area defense. And then we just finished up by describing the 5 kinds of battle positions: your primary, alternate, supplementary, subsequent, and your strong point. Now, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to first reach out to your own ROTC instructor, maybe find an MS4 in your program or a high-speed MS3. And if you still can't get your questions answered, feel free to reach out to me at silver.beatty@mso.umt.edu, and I will do my best to get those questions answered for you. Thank you.